So welcome to the Shebig Island Historical Society's lecture program. Tonight, we're pleased to have a command performance from Donna Damon, whose presentation, I must say, the ink is still wet on it, but she's going to soldier on and give us a lot of information about something we just kind of became aware of. And that's the fact that our museum, the Museum of Shebig History, is now 150 years old. So with that, as a prelude, I would like to introduce Donna. We all know Donna, and she can tell us about the history of the building that we now call home. Donna?
Okay, so we're going to try to share the screen. And then I just click on where it said, it looks like.
There you go. And then you click on play from, that's it, play from start. Perfect.
Okay. So the first thing I have to say is this is a disclaimer. So we thought that this was going to be about the building be 150 years old, because I put together a little brochure about the building, just so that Janelle, who works here, would have some information. And by accident, I put down that it was built in 1871. As I was researching for this, so a customer came in and said, "Oh, this is your 150th anniversary." And we're thinking, "Oh, how do we miss that?" Well, we missed it because it really isn't. It was really built in 1872. So, but I had already decided that I was going to do this. So I just thought, so that's, we're starting off with that disclaimer. So I texted Beth McNulty because we had been talking about it. And she said, "Well, didn't we know that all along and just decided to get an early start on the sesquicentennial year?" So that's where we are. And so I'm going to be starting. And this is, I'm calling this part one because as I got into it, the story of education on Shebig is more than just an hour presentation. And so I found a perfect stopping point, and there'll be a second lecture later this winter that will finish this up. So we're
Donna,
going to,
if I can interrupt here, we do have a few more people coming in.
okay.
And if anybody has a question, Donna, do you want to take questions as they come up, or wait till the end, or ask for questions?
I'll take them when they come up, and I can also take them at the end.
All right. So anybody in the audience who's now muted, if you have a question, please unmute yourself, and hopefully I will notice that, and you can put your hand up. That little thing down at the bottom on the right-hand side, reactions. That's where you can raise your hand. And if I don't recognize you, or I don't see your hand up, or you don't know how to put your hand up, that's okay. Just go ahead and unmute yourself and speak up, and we'll be very informal about this.
But if you don't have a comment to make, keep it muted, just because sometimes the background noise can inadvertently interfere with
dogs can bark.
Right. How are we doing, David? Are there more in the waiting room? Because I can wait.
We got 24 people and everybody's on board.
Okay. All right. So celebrating District 9 Schoolhouse, and that was changed today from 1871 to 1872. So I've just explained to everyone that inadvertently I got it in my head it was 1871. So it's nearly 150 years of serving the Shebig community that this building has served in many different ways. And it was built as a schoolhouse. And so what I decided to do is really, this is a discussion about education on Shebig, and then how does this building fit into the story of Shebig's education. So it's much more than just a story about a building. It's a story about a community and how that community evolves. So we're going back to the 1740s, 1746, when the Chandlers bought the west end of Shebig. And when we went back through the North Yarmouth records, we were able to find information about education funding on Shebig in 1755. And, you know, we were kind of flabbergasted that we could find that kind of information, but in North Yarmouth, they have all of the records for this, all the different towns around that were originally part of Old North Yarmouth. And so you'll see on the screen, it will say school money belonging to Shebig. And then it has numbers throughout in order up to 1761. And it's every year. I just put that on. That was the oldest one I could find. So to show you that there was some kind of education going on here. We don't know exactly what was going on, but we know that that the town was spending money on education, whether people had a common place where kids were all going, or whether they were being taught at home, or whether some of the parents taught them. We don't know the details. By the time of the Revolution, there were 5 families living on Shebig, and the Hamiltons at that point had 7 children. So you can imagine they were already, there was already a need for education. And on this map of Shebig from 1776, you can see 4 yellow blotches. There should be another one where you see my pointer. And for some reason that wasn't painted in on this map. And if you look down in the lower left-hand column side of the map, you'll see a red area by Falmouth. That shows the area that was destroyed by fire when the British burned Portland in 1775. We know that the Hamiltons, who lived in the Division Point area, or actually more like down behind the parsonage, but in that general vicinity, that their children could see Portland burn. And they left stories with their children and grandchildren about being on Shebig and seeing that happen. So in the 1790 census, we had 69 inhabitants, 33 men, 36 women, 20 boys under 16, and 13 men over 16. Now, the women, they didn't break down. And I'm not sure why that was, but we can probably take for granted that they didn't think it was important as what was happening with men, because unfortunately, we all know that that has been a recurring problem over the centuries. But so 20 boys under 16 means then some may have been, you know, babies, but you were school age if you were between the ages of 4 and 21. So it shows that there are quite a few school age children and people on the island at that time. And we also have in 1803, it shows an order for paying Rachel Soule $22 to actually be the teacher. So we know in 1803, Rachel Soule was paid $22. She eventually married Stephen Bennett and lived on Shebig and were the ancestors of most of the Shebig Bennetts. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see the different teachers over time in the Shebig district from 1805, 1807. There was surely some kind of education going on. Where the school was, we don't know, but we do know that it was someplace on the West End. Because for those of you who don't know or haven't heard some of my talks before, the West End was settled before the East End, which always surprises a lot of people. By the 18 teens, the population of Shebig had certainly increased. And wait a second, I just pushed something and I'm not sure what happened. Oh, I think I went ahead, sorry. So the people of Shebig petitioned the town of North Yarmouth for 2 school districts. Before, they had only one school district, which would have been the whole island. In the early 1800s, the second generation of people on Shebig, Sawyers, Hamiltons, Hills, they needed land, and they started buying land from the Waits, who owned the east end of the island. The blue line is the division line that ran from Division Point all the way into the middle of the West End Cricks. And so these are old property lines, which we don't really have to pay attention to right now. But the point is, there were a lot of children that were living in this area here. So wherever that original school was in this area, it was a long way to walk. So they petitioned the town, and this was the line they came up with. This darker blackish green line was the school line, which did not follow the division line. It followed more of a settlement pattern. So it would have started at Central Landing area, gone up through what is now the Roy Hill Road, and then diagonally cut across and went down to the shore in the vicinity of where the transfer station is. Now, what's interesting about this is that this line put all of the Hamiltons on the east end, which I don't know if it was intentional, but it certainly is what happened. So by the 1830s, we had Hamiltons who were actually buying land over in here. Solomon Hamilton built the house that used to sit where the Gilmartin's house is. And he petitioned the town to ask that his children be able to go to school on the other side of the line, because it didn't make sense for his children to go all the way down here when he could just go here. So it became a problem, even though they thought they had solved it in the 1817, 1820 time period. You'll see this shows the districts of the, well, every time I do that, it goes to the other one. Try to get rid of all these pictures. Okay, so this is what the school districts in 1817 for the whole town of North Yarmouth. You see all these different names. Down at the bottom, you see Cousins Island, it's Eliza Hill. And then there's G West, which means Great Shebig West End, the agent was David Chandler, and Great Shebig East was Ambrose Hamilton. That would have been Ambrose Hamilton Esquire. And that's the gentleman that we have over here. Now, he would have been much younger in that picture, but we're fortunate to even have a picture of someone who was living in 1821. So he was very involved with many of the deeds that were issued. He was involved, he was a justice of the peace, and he was involved, he married people, and he kept a lot of good records. But he was the school agent at the time, representing the people and the town. And so they were able to separate and get those two districts. So in 1821, the people in Cumberland wanted to separate from North Yarmouth. And they went and did a census there were all different kinds of issues that were going on about that issue, about the secession. But Shebig was a problem to them, and it had been a problem in which town would get it. Would it be Old North Yarmouth, which included the present town of Yarmouth, or would it go to Cumberland? At one point, they were going to cut Shebig right down the middle and give half of it to one and half the other, because they were concerned that if a boat went down with several seamen on it, they would be stuck with a whole bunch of widows and children. And so when it was time, when Cumberland actually was created, they needed to do a census and find out how many kids were actually in the district of Shebig and also the outer islands. So you'll see they found 52 children on the list on the left, 52 children who were living on Shebig. And this is in the East End district. We did not find the sheet for the 1821 for the West End So this is only the ones who were in the East End district. And so there's 52, and you can see the names of the people, and you can also see how many children they had who were school age. And it says 2 of this number were married, because remember, they were 4 to 21. So oftentimes you could find a child and his mother on the school roll. That didn't mean they went to school. It meant they were eligible to go to school. That's really what these numbers all mean. And that depended on tax money, and it had a lot of implications. But what's really interesting, which has nothing to do with the East End Schoolhouse that we're kind of talking about, is they looked at the outer islands that were part of the town of Cumberland. And on the outer islands, we look at, and they identify they're identifying the male, probably the head of household. So they're saying Mr. Bates on Bates Island had 7 people in his household who were between the ages of 4 and 21. Mr. Wallace, who was on Bangs Island. Now, we all know Bangs Island, which was used for years as an area for animals to graze and that kind of thing. In 1821, they had a pretty flourishing community compared to what we think of it today. So Mr. Wallace had 7, Mr. Doughty had 3, and Mrs. Griffin had 8. That means there were 18 school-age children on Bangs's. We don't know how many adults were on there, but that, to me, that's one of the most interesting bits of trivia out of this. And we look at Mrs. Griffin, who was, she had 8, and she says she's a widow. And in the discussion between North Yarmouth and Cumberland, they talked about a widow who they were already having to take care of with a lot of children. And this is probably Mrs. Griffin, who that was why they were concerned. Apparently her husband drowned. So then we have Hope Island, where they have 7, and then Crotch Island, which is now known as Cliff Island. 3/4 of that island originally was part of the town of Cumberland, and they had 10 children over there. So there were quite a few children in this area. So this is another interesting document that we found in Cumberland. Bailey Talbot, 24 of Freeport, passes the teaching test and is recommended to the district on the island of Shebig. And this is the paper that goes with it. Anyone who's familiar with South Freeport, and I saw that Polly's on here, the Talbot farm, which is on the South Freeport Road, he's from that family. And he was the grandfather of Ellen Talbot, who donated that, who put one of the first conservation easements in Maine on that farm. So it's kind of interesting that he did come here. And then we found another piece of paper that showed how much he earned, $29.27. And the agent was Stephen Bennett. And Stephen Bennett would have been on the West End. So he must have taught at whatever school they had on the West End. What another interesting fact here is, if you look and see how Stephen Bennett signed his name, this is his own personal signature with only 1 T on Bennett. So I don't know if we've been spelling Bennett wrong all these years by adding an extra T. So in 1823, they did another census, and this census is really great if you're doing genealogy, because it actually lists the name of the father or head of household, and it lists the names of their children, and it also lists how old those children were. So this is a really good primary source document if anybody is looking to confirm that they had a relative who was living during this period on Shebig. And this is signed by Ebenezer Hill, who was, it says, the committee of said district. He was the agent that year, elected at town meeting. It was a town meeting position. And one of the statements that he makes is that if they had taken it in July, they would have had more kids. So they probably had a lot of 3-year-olds, but he also says his son then wouldn't have counted because his son was almost 21. And so he just kind of, that's written kind of in the bottom of this whole thing. So we see that people really are engaged in education. So these kids are going to school someplace, and the question is where. So where were the schools? So District 8 was the West End. So District 8 was the original, where the original school would have been on Shebig. The East End is District 9. That was the one they added. So before 1843, I have no idea. I've not found any documents. I've not found any deeds. I've not heard any stories about what was happening before 1843. If anyone knows that, I would love to have you share that information. But after 1843, we found a deed that deeds a piece of property from Jonathan Weber to Charles Hamilton, who was the District 8 agent. And it was 16 square rods. And what's interesting is how they describe it. 2.5 rods from a pair of barns to a stone wall, and it's 4 rods square. So this was also had a reversion clause. They only charged $1.40 for this land. So they must have really wanted the school. But the reversion clause says if it's not used as a school, that the grantee, which would have been the district, had to pay the grantor. Oh no, the grantor, I'm sorry, I've got this backwards. I switched it tonight and I was right the first time. The grantor has to pay the grantee. So the Weber would have to pay the school district $1.40 to get it back. And I guess they had to sell it to him. But the bottom line is no deed ever was executed after that. So this piece of property is existing someplace in the middle of somewhere. And it's most likely right at the end of what we know as Lover's Lane near the current West End School. And there's a cellar hole there that was the school before the West End School, and there's no indication there was anything in between. So what's interesting is the fact that now there was no road in 1843. I've never gone in there roaming around to find, is there a stone wall in there? Is there evidence of a pair of barns? So, I mean, this will be kind of a fun project for somebody, but I don't believe there was anything in between. So that probably was the school from 1843 to 1896. My grandfather went to that school, and he told my father that at the end of it, that it was in such bad shape that squirrels would come up through holes in the floor. And that's the next part of the story in a minute, is how did they happen to get the West End School we have now? But in between, it's important to know that all through the centuries and decades, that island education produced teachers. And what we find is that kids will be on the school rolls, and shortly they're actually teaching a class. They're teaching students. And so they were getting a good enough education that they were able to then become teachers themselves and teach what they had learned. So one story is about Deborah Orr, who lived at the West End. And this is the house was built by her father, Stephen Orr, and it is a lot of people know it as the Higgins place. Some people know it as the Haydens, the Hatfields, or currently now the Daytons. And there's a really wonderful newspaper clipping of Deborah Orr telling the story about teaching over at Cliff Island, which was Crotch Island then. And she would row over there to go to school and board for a week. and then she would look back at Shebig. She could see her house, she could see everything, and she was never homesick as long as the doors were open to the barns. That's why I put this picture in there of the Higgins barns with the door open. But if they were closed and it started to get dark, she got really sad because she could just picture her family sitting around a table with lamplight and talking. And then she would be homesick. But so it was interesting to find not only her story, but also to find the receipt from where she was paid $2 a week to be the teacher over at Cliff Island in 1861, just before the Civil War began. So here at the East End, where was the first school? Well, the pre-Civil War school, the only one we know about, was below Lindy Smith's. And there was a little piece of land down there that eventually it actually had the blacksmith shop on it for a while. And that area was that building that apparently was built for school, but we cannot find any deeds that were recorded. So it was on the farm of Jonathan Hamilton, who it later went to his son, Ambrose Hamilton, and later to his son-in-law, Hugh Bowen, that area. So they probably just let them build the school there. And it was used until 1871, actually 1872. And the children 9 and under couldn't go to school in the winter. And this went on through for most of Shebig, that small children couldn't go, they didn't have enough room. But the curriculum in that school was to train boys for careers in the business and to go to sea. And if you, we have a diary that the Granell family has from 1860, where Charles Andrew Granell was 23 years old, but he was going to that school for the winter term when all of the men would come back from sea, or the big boys, they called them, and they would all they would have a totally different curriculum. So he took geography, philosophy, and double entry bookkeeping. And the Granells even have his workbook from accounting. So we know exactly what they were doing. And the people who went to that school were trained, as I said, to become really businessmen. And here's an example. If you look at this receipt from 1870, it's by it's signed by John F. Hamilton. The first thing you notice is his penmanship. So in that school, they learned great penmanship. But also it says, received to John A. Hamilton $110 for Solomon Sawyer, being part of payment for earnings of the sloop Mary Eliza for the year of 69. So they were running these businesses, and they weren't just sea captains, they were also businessmen. And they were learning that in that district school on Shebig. So going back in 1857, there's a Cumberland County wall map. And if you look at that map, I kind of blew this one up. You can see down in the West End, it says SH, Schoolhouse. In 1851, they actually laid out some private ways along Shebig, all over Shebig, but they weren't actually town roads yet. The town laid them out. They weren't town roads as we know them until the people of Shebig sued the town of Cumberland after the Civil War in the county. They won in Superior Court, and the county came down and laid out the north and south roads. But you can see SH, Schoolhouse. And this is this is opposite this road that looks like it's going up through here. And there was a road accepted in 1856 called the Mansfield Road, and you can still follow it, and we call it Lover's Lane. And it doesn't go exactly the way this map shows, but it's in that same vicinity. Then we go up here. Remember, we're 1857, and here's that schoolhouse I was telling you that's below Lindy's house, just kind of at the bottom of the hill. It says SH, Schoolhouse. And then it shows other, all these other wonderful things that's going on the island. what's interesting, the only wharf they show is the one that's down where the boatyard is now that the Littlefields had. Even they don't show the stone wharf, which was already in operation at that time. So that was kind of interesting. All right, so in 1871, this is the 1871 map, but I think it must have been published after 1871, or they knew it was going to happen, because you find school number 9 located where the East End Schoolhouse is right now. And so we know the deed was never executed until 1872. But interestingly enough, it wasn't registered until 1918. So it was signed in 1872, but not registered till 1918, sorry. And so then you look down at the West End and you see that school in the same location where those two roads converge, one that would go to the West End and one that would go up through what is now Lover's Lane. So the maps give more evidence of where the schools were. So how do we get the new District 9 schoolhouse in 1872? Okay, so it's located at the intersection of 2 travel ways that soon became county roads. And the land came from David Hill and Samuel Ross. They each sold a section of it, and they charged more money than they did on the West End. I think it was like $100 and something that they actually together got for that. It wasn't $1.40. This was the largest district school ever built in the town of Cumberland. There's actually a newspaper clipping that tells, there's a newspaper clipping that tells that, it describes how it was, what they actually had in it when it opened and what kinds of things were happening there. They had 3 terms: August through November, December through March, and April through June. 69 scholars and 1 teacher in 1878. So it was full as soon as it was built. Now, I'm not sure what the story is with these blue lines that are popping up on my screen, but it's not happening here. I don't know where it's happening. So this was the school, what would have been the school that was when it was built. It didn't have the little building on the back, so I kind of tried to crop that off. But it would have looked basically, if you just think of it as the front part of the building. And it had entrances from both the north and south roads, identical entrances. And there are chalkboards all around the room, and they're still there, and we covered them up just so that we don't destroy them. And the windows were built so that they allowed natural light. So even on the darkest rainy day, and I never thought about that. And my son Tom was in there one day with me, and he said, did you notice it was a really rainy, drizzly day? He said, do you see how well you can see in here? And I just had never thought about it. And the way it's situated, you can, because they didn't have electric lights. And that way they didn't really need kerosene lamps, because except when they used it at night. And they did use it for things like the singing school. They would have a singing master come. And sometimes I think it was somebody here on the island would come to the, and people would go there and practice singing. They also used the building when the church, the molding was letting go in the plaster in the church, and they had to close the church for a while, and they had church services there. They would have meetings at the schoolhouse. It was, it was a community building, because both the East and West End had these buildings, but they were, except for the church, they were the only public buildings on the island. So the question is, what were the duties of a school agent? In 1864, we've got Solomon Hamilton for District Number 9. So he did get his petition to get onto the East End. He does everything from cleaning the schoolhouse to buying supplies, paying the teacher, going around and doing a census for of how many kids there are. And he even goes to Portland and buys a stove and splits wood. So that's a busy job for somebody. And we actually have the school district book for District 8, which was the West End. Alice Bowman found it on the dump. And that's really interesting because it gives a lot of information about what was happening each year. And they would have actual meetings where they would vote on doing things. And I'm going to mention something about that in a minute. So then we have in 1869, we have Sam Ross, and he's actually visiting the school district, and he's going to the District 11, which was Cliff Island, Crotch Island. He was going to the West End, and so he's charging for the boat ride. And I think he may have been a selectman or a school board member. So he was more than an agent, I think, at that time. And they were examining teachers. And then in 1880, again, you have William Seabury, and he's asking them to bring over, next time they come, to bring the money that they owe from Cumberland. He's sending them a memo to Cumberland telling them what they owe. And what's interesting is M.I. Littlefield was the teacher, and he was boarding with his father. So he was living at home. And so the school was paying his salary, plus they were paying the board to his father for him, because it didn't matter if you lived on the island or you came from away, they were still going to pay your board. So this is a firsthand account of education at District 9 in 1878. And this is from our first exhibit that we did here, was in her own words. And this is a diary that was written by a girl who was 12 and turned 13 in 1878. And she lived on the East End and grew up at Hamilton Villa. Her parents had built Hamilton Villa, and she got a diary for Christmas, and she chronicled the whole year. And what she described was not an isolated fishing village, but a sophisticated middle-class Victorian neighborhood. And with all the trappings, they read all the bestsellers. They got 3 newspapers, and there's a lot to it. But she also talked about the school. These were 3 of her teachers that she had that year. She had Teresa Merrill, who came from Yarmouth. She had M.I. Littlefield, who I just mentioned. He was in big demand. I'm going to talk about him in a minute. But he broke his leg or hurt his leg or something. And then Clinton Hamilton had to come in, who was had grown up in the neighborhood, in the East End neighborhood, and had gone to Greeley. And so they had him come in, and he was just somebody that they all knew, but he came in to teach winter after M.I. Littlefield got hurt. And she was very disappointed because she was hoping M.I. would get her ready to go to Greeley. And eventually she did go to Greeley, she and her cousin Isabel. So M.I. worked back and forth between the East End district and the West End district between 8 and 9. And he was very well respected, and was supposed to have been a really good teacher. And here's an example of something he chose to do. He had this printed up. It says A.I. Littlefield, and these were all the kids he happened to have the spring term of 1881 at the East End. And do you see any common names there? It gives you an idea of how many Hamiltons you had in the East End school. And then if you look at all these other people, the Bennetts, the Curates, and the Hills and the Ross, they were also Hamilton descendants, they just didn't have the name. But he was very well respected. They had some teachers who were not as well respected, and the kids really didn't like them. My mother had some crazy stories that her father used to tell her about when he was a student there. One day they didn't want to go to school, so one of the boys got into school before the teacher and went up in overhead. There's a trap door. It's still here in this building. And there was a big pot-bellied stove, and he decided to just kind of urinate on it, and the teacher lit the fire, and it was so bad they had to go home because it was so smelly. So, not, in the old days, kids were like worse than sometimes we think people are today. My father used to say if the kids did today what we did, they'd be in jail. So anyway, that's a good example. So she tells about the lessons that she had. And this was a geography book that was from that day. And here's also a algebra book that they were using. And you can see there's, she was reading Tennyson, she was reading Dickens. And you can see she's read more than one Dickens because she's comparing the one novel to another, and her favorite is Martin Chuzzlewit. And she says it's the best or most interesting Dickens work, I think. And as I said, she wrote down everything she read, so we know how well read she was. So she talks about recess. And so these were three girls that she talked about. And so she tells about they played ball at noon with the little boys, for the big boys would not let us play with them. Now we've all been there. Sadie, Emma Hamilton, Emma Ross, and I went gumming. Spruce gum, which for those of you who don't know what gumming is, today's noon, and got a lot of really good gum, which is queer. Now, she was probably going into what was the golf course woods. And I think Polly probably can remember that we used to take jackknives and go up into those same woods and get spruce gum ourselves. So some of these things were carried on for a long time. But these are her friends, Sadie Granell, Emma Hamilton, and Emma Ross. And we just happen to have pictures of them. So there was an new East End school. What about the West End school? Well, this N. Rideout supervisor, who was kind of like the superintendent, he had a note in one of his reports. And in the report, it said, he's talking about different schoolhouses. The houses in 8 and 9, which would have been the West End and East End on Shebig, are tolerably comfortable rooms. But that in number 8 is quite too small to accommodate 2/3 of the scholars at one time. So they couldn't even fit all the kids in the school. And this was sometime in the 1860s that he was writing this. So the question is, when did they get a school and how did that come about? So actually it was 1859 when he was talking about it, but it took 40 years before they actually built the school. And so they didn't build it until 1896. And the reason they didn't build it is because we can all relate to this. They made all their decisions in their own little district. They had to have meetings and everybody had to agree. Or not everybody, but you have to have a majority agree to do something. So they all agreed that they needed a new school, but they didn't want to pay for it. So they received some money from the town, but then when it came time to build a school, you had to really cough up the money. So District 8 in the mid-60s and 1860s, we know this because we have the district book. They bought the granite for a foundation. They all agreed to buy the foundation to build a new school because they really needed it because they couldn't fit all the kids in the building. But they couldn't get consensus on actually building the school. They voted on it over and over and over again, and every time it would be no. They couldn't get a majority of the people to do it. So it wasn't until the 1890s when school districts were abolished in Maine, and then Cumberland finally had made the decision themselves that they got the new West End School. And they, every once in a while, they would have a vote to see if they should sell the granite that was out in the bushes, and they'd always say no. So if you go to the West End Schoolhouse today, you'll see it has a granite foundation. By that period of time, almost all the houses and buildings that they were building on Shebig had brick, but they still had that granite from during the heyday of the stone sloops. And so that's why the West End School has granite foundation. So here are I found this in the Cumberland Town vault, and it's a drawing of a school. And I looked at it and I thought, that looks like the West End School, but there's not two doors. And then I found the picture. And here's a photograph when it had two front doors and a window in the front. This was an early picture. And you see it's got shingles up on the cupola or whatever, I'm not sure what you, turret, but clapboards down below, just like this plan does. And even has 3 windows over the doors. So it was built, this was the plan for the school, even though it says preliminary sketch of street elevation for a rural schoolhouse. So that was the same plan that they used for that. And you can see the pole, if you look on the top of this, and I still don't know where these blue things came from, but it was a flagpole. So that up on the top of that, they were able to raise a flag. So in the town report, they actually outlined all the money they spent for this new schoolhouse. And they paid $20 for the lot from the heirs of John Weber, because it had been part of one of the original Weber farms. And so a lot of the people on Shebig worked on that project. There were truckers, which meant they were oxen teams because there were no trucks in the 1890s. And they worked on the foundation, they provided lumber, they graded the lot, they painted, they provided materials and labor. And about 1/3 of the cost of that school, the money stayed on Shebig. So in a way, it was actually a win-win. They got a new school and people on the island made some money. So just here's some pictures of the schools were, kind of busting at the seams here. And the picture on the left is earlier than the one on the right. And the one on the right, we know is after 1896, because in 1896, they built this little building on the back that where we use it kind of as a library workroom. But that was built for the primary school kids. And my mother said when she went to school here, that's where they started, and they went through 2nd grade there. Here's a picture of what the inside of this building looked like with a lot of kids. And you can see how many older kids there are and then some younger kids. And this is probably in the spring or fall, because you don't see the big boys here who are back at work, who are out working either in farms or the sea. At this time, and you can go into the Cumberland town reports and town records. Actually, it's in the state archives, and you can add up, and you can go online and it will list all the children who were in District 8 and 9. And when you add them up, there's over 200. And it's within 15 or 20 people, students or people within the ages of 4 and 21, as there are in all of the schools in Cumberland combined at that time. And they had something like 7 or 8 one-room schoolhouses. And so again, we have to remember that little kids could not go to school until they were over 9 in the winter, because they just did not have the space. So that's why they added the primary. So here's a picture of the school before they had the primary room. And then you look, and here all these kids were in the primary room. They all went to school after 1896. Some of them were born in 1896, so that's why we know they're probably 4, 5, 6 years old. And the West End school was crowded too. They had all kinds of kids down there. So the people on Shebig decided that the solution was, and this is actually a quote from the petition that is here. They are now living upon said Shebig Island more than 200 children between the ages of 4 and 21 years. We, the petitioners, request said town to establish and maintain a free high school upon said Shebig Island for at least 20 weeks. And so that's what they were asking for in 1896. That was at the same time that they got the West End Schoolhouse and they got the addition on the back of the school. And I think that that one on the back may have been to placate them, because it wasn't until 1902 that they actually did get the Shebig Island High School opened. And it was in what was called the Golden Cross Hall, which was located where the present hall is today, burned in 1927. And they built the hall that we have today. But so this is, you get an idea of what it looked like. One of those typical kind of old Grange Hall, 2 stories, with one story had like a meeting room and the other had like a place for plays and that kind of thing. And so both of these are from that building. Both of these pictures at different times. They're not all the same kids. But that's where the first high school was in 1902. And the first teacher was Carol McCusick. And he was a young man from Parkman, Maine. He was a student at Bates. He needed some money, so he took some time off from Bates and was hired here to be the first teacher. And he had an inkwell that was given to him by a Shebig student, Carl Littlefield. And he kept that on his desk throughout his life, and it's been donated to the museum. We've used it in a couple of exhibits by a descendant, Mark Storms, whose wife, Debbie, owns what was the Clare House on Shebig. So he has a connection here. He was the father of Victor McCusick, who was the father of medical genetics from at Johns Hopkins. And he was also the father of Victor's twin, Vincent McCusick, who was the Chief Justice of the state of Maine. And he was also the father of Grace Storms, who was a Greeley history teacher, who many of us had. So there was a real connection between this first part of education and Shebig over time, and that continues today. But he was a great poster boy for starting a high school on Shebig. The first graduating class from the Shebig High School was 1905, and they had their celebration at the Hamilton Hotel. It was the first event, even before they took in boarders. They had a dinner at the Hamilton Hotel because Harry Hamilton's daughter, Ruth, was in that first class. And some of the graduates are in this picture, along with some of the people who were working at the hotel. And this would have been Shebig High School in about 1906. The first time that people from the East End and West End ever went to school together was when they went to high school. So some of these people who lived on the West End, and there's quite a few of them actually in this picture, they, if they didn't know each other from church or they didn't have family connections, they really met people for almost the first time. And they had never been to school together until they went to high school, and they all lived here on Shebig Island. And so that's kind of, this is Ernest Ricker. He lived in the West End. This is Rose Ellen Dyer. She lived in the West End. This is Maddie Newcomb from the West End. I'm just picking those out right off the top of my head. But so anyway, and there are some other ones as well. But you can see this is this is Helen Calder, who was Helen Hamilton, who was Dick Calder's mother. This is Rita Bowen, who was Brian, and they were from the East End. So this was a great opportunity for people to get to know each other. So in 1910, none of those people got to go to the new Shebig Island High School. But the new Shebig Island High School was built and opened in the fall of 1910. And this is the new Shebig High School. And I'm sure you all recognize it as what we think of as the Grange, which we're not supposed to call the Grange anymore because it's been disbanded. It was later Central School, and it's got its own history as well. But this was built as the high school on Shebig, and people here were pretty damn proud to have their own high school. And here's the interior shot of the high school, of what it looked like with the teacher there sitting at the desk and that great big old boiler. That wasn't probably a boiler, it was probably a wood burner. And so George Hicks captures the first students. And here's a this is the back of this is a postcard. George Hicks did a lot of the photography for Henry Bowen for his postcards that he sold in his stores, and he did a lot of photo cards. And this is written by Violet Bennett, who is one of the students here. And she's writing to her sister Mabel, who had just graduated in June and had recently gotten married to Roy Hill. And in it, she says, Mama said to tell you she was coming up the last of the week. This is one of the pictures Mr. Hicks took up on the schoolhouse doorsteps. We are all well. Love to all, Violet. So here it is, the first day of the Shebig Island High School. And we have people from the West End and we have people from the East End in this picture as well. And graduation meant a great deal to families and the community. Here's an example of these class of 1910. In June, I just mentioned Mabel Bennett, who became Mabel Hill. And this is a class of 1917. This is Danietta Doughty Miller, who later became a Sawyer. She was Albion Miller's sister. And you can see that, you know, they really took great pride in their, and in that accomplishment of graduating from high school. This is the Shebig Island High School in the fall of 1926. This was the class of 1927, which wasn't all of these, just a couple of them, was the last four-year graduation until 1936. It was a mainland decision. They decided they would do better to just have a two-year high school and our two-year, you know, and then encouraged them to go someplace else to finish up, because the party line was from the mainland that they couldn't get a good enough education here for 4 years. So if they only went for two, they could then go to some other place and get a better education. What would happen is there was no place really to go, and so they didn't get any education. So education looked bleak, and then a new teacher was hired. And this is a picture of a young man named Stanley Libby, who came here in about 1929 or 1930. And he found all of these very bright children who were going to be deprived of a four-year education. And so he was from Westbrook, Maine. He was a childhood friend, lifelong friend of Rudy Valley, and he was hired as the junior high principal. And I say here, the rest was history. He made an incredible impact on these people in this picture. And he comes back again and does an encore later on. But just in the front row, people who you may know, the Shirley Burgess, Floyd Hamilton, Earl Doughty, Sanford Doughty, Alvin Newcomb, Genevieve Calder. You see Lewis Ross behind here, Geneva Bowen, and Bill Ross, Ray Newcomb, Clyde Bowen, Alman Hutchinson. They all, Juanita Cleese, Edith Miller, they all had stories about the impact he made on their lives. He came here not just as a teacher, but he came here and he created a Boy Scout troop. And he got these boys engaged right off the bat, and to see that there were things that he could teach them and they were willing to learn. He eventually, as they got older, they created their own band. And they were the only Boy Scout troop so you can see this drum, you may have seen it in some of our exhibits. Shebig Island High School and the Boy Scouts of America, Troop 21, they were the only Boy Scout troop that every single boy in the school was part of the band. And you see them here. They got to lead a band at a jamboree in Augusta because of the distinction. The only problem was they didn't, as Sanford loved to tell the story, they started marching. They didn't know where they were supposed to go. So they just kept going and the rest of the band went in a different direction. They eventually caught up with them. But, and you can see here's Stanley playing the tuba. And he elicited the help of Mike Mansfield, who was, had run a band, had a band himself. And so he instilled the community spirit in these boys. And that here they are all participating in 2 different Memorial Days. This is the older group, and this is later on, you can see by the uniforms. And he was a mentor to them, and he did more than just teach them subjects. So at that time, schools, one of Stanley's ideas was to reconfigure the school. So District 9 became the junior senior high school, and they put a wall down through the middle and separated the junior from senior high school. And then the East Enders, the younger kids, moved to the old high school, which was and became the central school. But the West End stayed put. Here they are on a picnic down at the shore. But they stayed down there. And so voila, Shebig High School becomes a 4-year high school. And this is the fall of 1935. And Stanley Libby has single-handedly kept all these kids in school. This was the junior senior high school on Shebig Island in 1935. And in 1936, these were the graduates. You see here they are, the senior class, they're out probably that same day that they took that picture at with all the kids in it. They separated them out, and here they are all decked out for their graduation. And that year, more kids graduated from Shebig than they did from Greeley. There were 9 who graduated from Greeley, and there were 12 who graduated from Shebig. And so that was a big accomplishment for him. So coming attractions. The second part of this will be later on, and it will include World War II, what was happening on World War II. Stan Libby returns for his encore. The Shebig Island High School closes, and kids risk their lives going to school. So these are the pictures. This is one that Martha took. It says the Army, this is Martha's writing, the Army take over at noontime, Charlotte, Chuck, and Ruth. This was during school, and they go out at recess, and they're picking up an Army, some kind of Army guy. So that's another whole story about the interaction between the island and World War II and school. So that's going to be in the second installment. And then these extravaganzas, again, Stanley Libby comes back, and they have these gigantic graduations. This is in the church, standing room only. And you've got a class of 9 or 10 students here that he keeps in school. And then the kids going to risk their lives. And then you see what happens when you don't have a high school. And so that will be later on in the winter. And so stay tuned and we'll let you know. So now if anybody has any questions or comments, I'd like to hear stories.
Donna, this was great. I think I saw Uncle Rich in one of those pictures and Cliff Leonard.
Yep, you did.
It was fun, but I couldn't manipulate my phone quick enough to identify everybody. So a little frustrating.
Yeah, well, this will be on the website as soon as they get it uploaded.
Yeah.
So you can go back and watch it and stop it.
Cool. Good
So for
stuff.
everybody, and all of our lectures that over the last year or so are on there, and that makes it so that you can really look at the pictures, because it's really hard. I'm zipping through because nobody wants to sit here and listen to me for the next 40 years. So, but that way you can really look at the pictures and see who, who's in it.
Absolutely.
Because you'll find your grandfathers in several of those older ones.
Yep. Yeah. And I never knew where Lover's Lane was.
Oh, I bet you've been there though.
I don't know. Out behind the old schoolhouse down
It's across the road. It goes up behind Ballard's.
there? Wow. I don't think so.
Well, that was a long way from our homes.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, even when we were riding motorcycles around the
I
island.
know, that's why I said I bet you've been up there.
Yeah, well, no. Parker's Woods and Grandpa Solomon's house and all that, but not
Yeah.
so much. Interesting and way cool. And I look forward to hearing the stories about the Gloriana and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, you
Good
lived
stuff.
it, so you know what it's
Yeah.
true.
Yes, indeed. Thanks for doing it.
You're welcome. Anybody else have any questions or comments or any great stories? Or I'm going to tell you one Sanford story, though. This is really funny. It was when he loved Stan Libby, but he had this little Popeye. Somebody may have heard this story. He had this little toy Popeye thing, and he'd wind it up and he'd let it go in the aisle, and all of a sudden the kids would start laughing. Well, Stanley had it, so he took it and he took the wheels off from it, and he gave Sanford the thing back. And so Sanford would put it on his finger and he'd put it in the inkwell. And every once in a while, Popeye would pop up, and then everybody start laughing and Popeye would disappear again. And so I can't believe that Stanley just didn't take the whole thing, that he let him do that. But he didn't figure it out.
Donna, why don't you take down the picture? Mary has her hand raised. Take down the picture so we can see, everybody can see the
How
hand.
do I do that?
Well, just to stop, go to the top of the screen and
Oh, yeah. Stop sharing.
that's the one. There you go.
Okay.
All right. And Mary's got her hand up here in the corner.
Okay.
Actually, it's John.
It's me. I'm tickling my ear. I got in a little bit late. I noticed there were a lot of Hamilton teachers. It was Ken a direct relation to all those Hamilton teachers?
All Hamiltons are related.
I know they all are, but is it direct?
That's really, you think it's a joke when we say there's a little bit of Hamilton in all of us. It's really true. No, they all go back. There's several Hamilton lines. There's 4 different Hamilton brothers who had children, and there's a bunch of sisters. Some people on Shebig go back to 6 or 7, 8 of them had descendants, and some people go back to 6 or 7. I only go back to 3. So Valerie, will you go back to 3 of them? One of my cousins is on here.
She's trying to raise her hand.
She's waiting.
Anyone else have any great stories? Or you may be holding them till we get to the more modern era.
Yeah, if you want to speak, just put your cursor in the corner of your picture and ask to unmute, and you should be able to unmute yourself. Did I get that right, John and Mary? I think that's the secret button.
I want to ask Cap Leonard a question if he can unmute. Because I need this information for my next talk. Do you remember when they started the school bus?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do you remember when they actually got a school bus? Or they got some kind of transportation that got you to the West End?
Frank Rhines ran his car before.
Oh, that's how they took you?
Yeah, he ran for a while before, but I don't remember the exact time of the start of the school buses. But this is the first time, Donna, that we've been unmuted and watching your magnificent presentations. And I'd just like to say on behalf of myself and Jane and my family and my Hamilton connections, your parents will be so proud of you.
Thank you. And I didn't pay him to say that. I didn't ask him to unmute for that. I really wasn't.
That's
I
the,
just was wondering, I'll ask Alice if she remembers, when, did you go to the West End Schoolhouse at all?
Who are you talking to?
You,
Me?
Yeah.
Me? Yeah.
yes, Cappy.
I went there 4th, 5th, and 6th grades
Okay.
with Mildred Johnson.
Right, because I think that's when they had to have some kind of transportation, because that's going to be in the next installment. But they got to a certain point where they just didn't have the West End kids go to school together and the East End kids at the central school. So they took the younger kids and they went to the central school, which is like the Grange Hall, and all the older kids went to the West End, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so that's
Yep.
going to be, so that's a teaser, for the next installment.
Good job, Donna.
Anybody else have any questions? Michael, oh, you were just saying thumbs up? Oh, okay. All right, well, if no one has any questions or comments or stories, I guess it's time for people to go home and go to bed.
well, Donna, as always, we thank you for your stellar presentation. And I know it's been a rather difficult preparation for this evening, and you've come through with flying colors. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think everybody else, I see thumbs up and applauds. Yeah, and some out loud. That's good.
Okay, well, good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you
night.
all for attending. We really appreciate your support.
Anyway, fabulous presentation.
All right, see you later.
Good night.
Good night, all.